Who do you think you are? You think you deserve to be here? At the party, I kicked Chunyuan hard to the ground and stared down at him coldly. Li Wan, seeing what happened, screamed and rushed over to yank me away. Su Yang, what are you doing? This is Chunyuan, my new assistant. I brought him along just to let him see how things work in the industry, that's all. At her words, I remembered the rumors I'd overheard earlier that day. People whispering about how close Li Wan had gotten to her assistant. I'd planned to deal with it later, but I never expected her to bring him right in front of me. At the thought, I turned to Li Wan and slapped her hard across the face. Since when did you get the guts to talk to me like that? ... The door to the private room swung open. Chunyuan, the new assistant Li Wan had just hired, walked in with his arm wrapped around her waist. The room went dead silent at the sight. Every eye turned to me, waiting to see how I'd react. Li Wan acted like she didn't notice. She waved at everyone with a smile, then gestured to Chunyuan beside her. Let me introduce you all. This is Chunyuan, our new assistant at the company. Go on, get acquainted. Chunyuan stood at her side, nodded slightly with a smile, then stepped over to me and held out his hand. Nice to meet you, Mr. Su. I'm Chunyuan, Ms. Li's assistant. I look forward to working with you. I glanced down at his outstretched hand, let out a cold laugh, and kicked him square in the chest.
Boom.
He went flying backward and slammed hard into the floor. Every eye in the room was on me now, but I ignored them all. I picked up a bottle of red wine, walked over to him and poured the entire contents over his head. He flinched, about to squirm away from the wine pouring down his face, but I planted my foot hard on his cheek. Kid, who do you think you are? You think you belong here? His face was pressed flat against the sole of my shoe, and he made muffled, whimpering sounds. Su Yang, what do you think you're doing? Li Wan shrieked and charged over, yanking me away from him. He's just my new assistant. I only brought him here to show him the ropes. Is this really worth losing your temper over? At that, I glanced at her, raised my other hand and slapped her hard across the face. Smack. The sound was sharp and clear. Her head snapped to the side. She stumbled back a step, then stood, frozen, hand pressed to her cheek. I stared at her coldly. It hasn't been that long, and you already dare talk to me like this? At my words, her face drained of all color. Before the arranged marriage, her father had drilled it into her again and again. This union was crucial to the Li family. No matter what happened, she must never provoke Su Yang. She had to hold her temper no matter what. As time went on, she'd decided I was far more easygoing than she'd expected, and she'd stopped taking her father's warnings seriously. Now, seeing the scene before her, she realized just how foolish she'd been. I hadn't lashed out before only because she'd never crossed me. If she had, my methods would be far worse than she could ever imagine. She was about to apologize when Chunyuan, struggling to his feet not far away, stumbled over to her side and looked up at me with a pitiful expression. Chu, I don't know how I offended you. If there's something I did wrong, take it out on me. Just don't take it out on Miss Li. As he spoke, he pulled Li Wan into his arms, putting on a show of protecting her. The second his arms wrapped around her, Li Wan froze as if she'd been burned. She twisted sharply away, yanking herself free from his arm on her shoulder, and stepped half a step to the side. His hand hung in midair, not yet withdrawn, when Li Wan turned to face him. Her chin tilted up slightly as she looked down at him. Without a moment's hesitation, she raised her hand and slapped him hard. Smack. The crack was even louder than the one before. His head snapped to the side. A bright red handprint bloomed across half his face. Before he could steady himself or turn back around, Li Wan pointed a finger at him, her gaze icy. Who gave you the nerve to put your hands on me? Chunyuan stared at her in stunned disbelief. He'd never expected her to turn on him so fast. Before he could process what was happening, Li Wan drove her knee up hard, the toe of her shoe slamming straight into his groin. Chunyuan's face went from flushed bright red to deathly white in an instant. Woo-ha! He doubled over, folded in half like a shrimp. After a strangling groan, he crumpled to his knees, curled into a ball. He clutched himself between the legs, his shoulders hunched tight, his forehead pressed to the floor. Ragged, muffled grunts of pain forced their way out of his throat. Li Wan stood over him, glanced down, and spat directly in his face, her expression full of disgust. She didn't spare him another glance. She walked over to me, wrapped her arms around my arm, and said in a sycophantic tone, "I'm sorry. It was my fault, I didn't think it through. I never should. V brought him here. Don't be mad, okay?" I glanced down at her, then flicked my eyes toward Chunyuan curled on the floor. I wrenched my arm free and kicked her hard to the ground, staring down at her coldly. "Don't touch me. You make me sick." With that I looked around at the others in the room. "Sorry, I have an urgent matter to attend to. I'll take my leave first." The people around the table exchanged glances and quickly waved it off, saying it was fine. As soon as I left the private room, I called Li Wan's father, Li Haiyuan. It rang twice before he picked up. "Mr. Su, to what do I owe the pleasure of this call?" I said into the phone. "Mr. Li, your daughter, my fiancée, just paraded some pretty boy right in front of me at a public gathering. All over each other. How do you propose we handle this?" "What? She did what?" At the roar of Li Haiyuan's voice, I held the phone away from my ear and rubbed it, then went on. "That's the long and short of it. Your daughter made a laughingstock of me in front of everyone. There's no point in continuing this engagement. All the promised deals are off." I hung up before Li Haiyuan could reply. Just then I felt a hand grab my arm from behind. I turned around. Li Wan had slipped out of the private room at some point. She was clutching my sleeve with both hands, her voice tight and hoarse. "Su-young, it's not what you think. Let me explain." I glanced at her, said nothing, shook her off roughly, and walked away. She started to follow, but the door to the private room swung open again behind her. Chunyuan stumbled out, limping badly. The red mark from the slap still blazed on his cheek, his collar was soaked and his hair hadn't fully dried. When he saw Li Wan, he wore a guilty look. "I'm sorry, Wan. This was all my fault. I caused you so much trouble." Li Wan was already panicked and on edge. Seeing Chunyuan step out, all her fury boiled over. She marched right up to him and kicked him hard in the knee. He crumpled to the ground at once. That wasn't enough for her. She kept kicking him over and over, hurling insults as she went. "Who do you think you are? Who gave you the nerve to touch me? You think you're somebody? Playing the innocent, the victim? You make me sick." Chunyuan lay on the ground taking the beating, too afraid to fight back. He just kept apologizing over and over. She kicked him for more than 10 minutes, only stopping when a thin trickle of blood ran down his forehead. She turned to go find me, but I was already long gone. At that, her disgust for him deepened even more. She'd been nice to Chunyuan before, only because he was obedient, and knew exactly what to say to flatter her. Flattered by his compliments, she'd kept him around and even overlooked all his inappropriate little advances. She'd never once considered actually getting involved with him. But she'd never imagined her carelessness would land her in this much trouble. She had no idea how she was going to explain any of this to her father when she got home. At the thought, she kicked him hard one more time right in the stomach. "Never show your face in front of me again. You disgust me." With that, she turned and left. It was late at night by the time Li Wan got home. Li Haiyuan sat on the sofa, his back straight, his hands folded in his lap. In front of him lay a wooden stick as thick as an arm. The wood was smooth, clearly worn from years of use, the edges darkened by sweat from countless hands. Li Wan stood a short distance away. When she saw the stick, she froze. Her bag slipped from her hand and fell to the floor. "Come here, Neil." Li Haiyuan's voice was flat, completely without emotion. Li Wan's lips moved. She wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Slowly she walked to a spot a step away from the coffee table, bent her knees, and knelt on the tile floor. The floor was cold. She kept her head bowed, hair falling around her face, her shoulders held tight with tension. Li Haiyuan stared at her for several long moments before speaking again. "Su-yang called me." His voice was still flat, impossible to read. "He said you were messing around with some pretty boy, all over each other in front of a whole crowd." His gaze settled on the top of her bowed head. "What happened?" Li Wan froze. After a long pause, she spoke. "His name is Chunyuan. He's my new assistant. I noticed he's quick on his feet and knows what to say, so I paid a little more attention to him. There was a party today, so I thought I'd bring him along to show him the ropes, let him meet people. But as soon as we walked in, he accidentally put his arm around my waist. Her voice trailed off, getting quieter and quieter until she stopped entirely. By this point, Lee Hyun's face was dark with rage. You're sure it was an accident? Lee Won hung her head lower, her voice dropping to a murmur. I'm not sure. Su Yang lost his temper when he saw it. He kicked Chun Yuan first, sent him flying, then poured red wine all over him and stepped on his face. I tried to stop him, and he slapped me. Then she told him everything that had happened after that, leaving out no detail at all. When she finished, the living room fell silent for a few seconds. Lee Hyun slowly stood up from the sofa and picked up the wooden stick in front of him. Lee Won panicked completely at the sight. Dad, I know I was wrong. I really do. I didn't think it through. I just liked how he talked. It was convenient to have him around. You liked how he talked? You liked how he talked, so you brought him along? Do you have any idea how many people saw what happened? You pulled that stunt right in front of Su Yang, in front of everyone. Did you even stop to think how he'd feel? Lee Won kept her head down, her voice starting to shake. Dad, Before she could say another word, the stick came down hard on her back. Crack. The sound was dull and heavy, echoing through the quiet living room. Lee Won jolted, doubling forward slightly. Tears burst from her eyes at once, but she bit her lip and didn't make a sound. Lee Hyun's voice was tight with fury, as if forced out through gritted teeth. Who you hire as an assistant is none of my business. But how dare you carry on like that in front of everyone? Have you forgotten everything I've ever taught you? As he spoke, the stick struck Lee Won again. And again. Each blow landed with a heavy thud. The sound of wood hitting flesh mixed with her stifled gasps, ringing out in the empty living room. Lee Won knelt there, her hands braced on the tile floor, her shoulders shaking. Tears dripped onto the floor, leaving small dark splotches. Dad, I really am sorry. Of course you're wrong. Lee Hyun's voice rose at last and the stick came down again. You're wrong for acting without thinking. You're wrong for not knowing your place. You're wrong for doing whatever you want, whenever you want. Lee Won didn't move or try to dodge. After those last blows, she curled into a small ball, her shoulders hunched. The back of her shirt was ridged with welts, the fabric raised in angry lines. Lee Hyun stood over her, his chest rising and falling. His knuckles were white where he gripped the stick. He stared at her curled, bowed form, breathed heavily for a moment, and his voice softened slightly, though it remained heavy. Do you have any idea how much work the Lee family put into securing this marriage alliance? Lee Won said nothing. She just nodded. Do you know what will happen to us if the Su family calls it off? She kept her head down, her voice rough and barely audible. I know. You know, and you still did this? Lee Hyun slammed the end of the stick against the floor with a heavy thud. He breathed hard for a moment, staring down at his kneeling daughter. After a long while he let go of the stick, stepped back, and sat down on the sofa again. His voice went flat and cold once more. You will go to Su Yang right now and beg him. You will save this alliance no matter what it takes. If you can't, then get out of the Lee family. As far as I'm concerned, I won't have a daughter anymore. Lee Won stayed on her knees, her shoulders still shaking. She lifted her head. Her eyes were red and swollen, 2 clear tear tracks streaked down her face, and her lips were faintly pale. She met her father's gaze for a few seconds. Then she spoke, her voice hoarse. I'll go. I'll fix this, I promise. Don't worry, Dad. I'll make him forgive me. Lee Hyun leaned back against the sofa, his hands resting on his knees, and watched her silently. You'd better. The next morning, in my private villa, I sat on the sofa with a cup of coffee in hand, going over a project briefing. The butler walked in from the doorway and stopped 2 paces away from me. Mr. Su, Miss Lee Won is at the door. She says she'd like to see you. I paused slightly at that, set down my coffee cup, and looked up at him. Let her in. The butler nodded and turned to leave. A moment later footsteps sounded and Lee Won stood before me. The second she saw me, she dropped to her knees with a thud, bowed her head and said in a hoarse voice, Su Yang. About yesterday. I'm sorry. I sat on the sofa and looked down at her. Sorry? You paraded some pretty boy into the private room with your arm around my fiancé, in front of everyone, and made a laughingstock of me. And you think one sorry makes it all go away? She didn't lift her head. Her shoulders tensed slightly. I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have brought him, shouldn't have let him get close, and I definitely shouldn't have defended him in front of you. I really do know I was wrong. Will you forgive me just this once? I'll be more careful from now on. This will never happen again. Never again? I let out a cold laugh. Liwan, you humiliated me in front of everyone. I haven't even come after you for it yet, and you've got the nerve to beg me for forgiveness. Who do you think I am? You mess up, come here, get on your knees and cry, and I'm just supposed to pretend nothing happened. Is that what you think of me? At my words, her shoulders shook harder. Just then I noticed the bruises and marks all over her body. They were mostly covered by her clothes, but the exposed skin showed clear welts from a beating with a stick. I knew at once that she'd only come because her father had forced her to. Someone like her couldn't be gotten rid of the usual way. Even if I threw her out by force, her father would just keep beating and pressuring her. She'd show up on my doorstep again before long. Normal methods wouldn't work. So I'd have to try something else. I leaned back against the sofa and looked at her. Liwan, there is a way if you really want to save this engagement. At that, she lifted her head at once, her face lighting up with joy. Really? Of course. I smiled faintly and went on. After all, this whole mess started because of that pretty boy. He was the one who came on to you, wasn't he? Even if I forgive you, he'll probably come around causing trouble again sooner or later. Teach him a lesson good enough to satisfy me, and I'll give you another chance. Before I'd even finished speaking, she blurted out happily, no problem. I'll call him right now. She dialed Chun Yuan's number at once. Chun Yuan, it's me. Are you free tomorrow? Let's meet. Chun Yuan never in a million years expected Liwan to reach out to him first. He quickly said he was free. Good, she said. I'll send you the time and place later. She hung up and looked at me. I gave her a faint smile. That's settled then. How this ends is up to how you perform tomorrow. You can go now. At my words, she stood up and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her. The living room fell quiet. I picked up my coffee cup and took a sip. It was already cold. The next day at noon, deep in an alleyway, Chun Yuan arrived 10 minutes early. He stood in the middle of the alley, leaning against a rusted water pipe, glancing toward the mouth of the alley every few seconds. Before leaving home that day, he'd put on a clean white shirt and fixed his hair. There was barely contained excitement on his face. He thought Liwan had come around. The call yesterday had come out of nowhere. Her tone hadn't been as warm as before, but she'd reached out to him first. That had to mean something, he thought. A second chance. Just then, footsteps sounded from the alley mouth. Chun Yuan straightened up at once, put on a smile, and took 2 steps forward to greet her. Liwan walked into the alley. She wore a thin, dark coat, her hair tied back, her face completely expressionless. Chun Yuan didn't notice her cold demeanor. He strode forward quickly, opened his arms and moved to hug her. Wan, you finally agreed to see me. He never finished the sentence. A sharp pain exploded in his chest. Liwan lifted her foot and drove the sole of her shoe straight into the center of his chest, sending him stumbling backward. His lower back slammed into the wall with a dull thud. He slumped against the wall, one hand pressed to his chest, staring at her in stunned disbelief. Wan, what? Liwan stood where she was, lowered her foot, and glanced at the toe of her shoe like she was checking it for dirt. Then she lifted her head and stared at him coldly. Who said you could touch me? The smile froze completely on Chun Yuan's face. Wan, what's wrong with you? We were fine before, weren't we? Before? Liwan cut him off, her tone flat, and even no emotion in it at all. What you thought was before was just in your head. I've thought about it. If you hadn't kept stirring things up that day, I never would have brought you to the party, and Su Yang never would have misunderstood. Everything that happened to me after that is all your fault. Chun Yuan's face fell. Wan, I was honestly trying to help you that day. I was scared he'd get the wrong idea about you. Help me. Li Wan tilted her head as if seeing him for the first time. Your idea of helping me is putting your arm around my waist in front of everyone? Standing up and putting on a show saying take it out on me, while I was getting hit? Chun Yuan opened his mouth but couldn't get a single coherent excuse out. Li Wan didn't. Look at him again. She turned her head slightly, and jerked her chin toward the mouth of the alley. Do it. A crowd of men suddenly poured into the alley. Before Chun Yuan could react, more than a dozen men had rounded the corner, each clutching a stick. Two of the bigger ones blocked both ends of the alley to keep him from getting away. Chun Yuan went pale at once. He stumbled back a step until his back was pressed to the wall, his eyes darting frantically between the men closing in on him. Wan, what are you doing? Listen to me. Don't say my name. Li Wan stood behind the group of men, watching him coldly. Chun Yuan's eyes darted wildly around the circle of men, his face shifting from shock to terror. He tried to force his way out to the side but two men shoved him back. His voice cracked. Wan. Li Wan. You can't do this to me. I really love you. You can't. Ah! An iron bar crashed down on his shoulder, sending him lurching sideways and cutting off his words. Then a second blow. A third. The bar slammed into his arms, his back, his thighs. One heavy thud after another, mixing with Chun Yuan's broken cries and echoing off the narrow alley walls. I never meant to hurt you. I really. His voice grew weaker and weaker, turning from shouts to gasps, from gasps to choked grunts. He crumpled to the ground, curled up, his hands over his head, his back hunched like a shrimp trampled into the mud. His broken pleas drifted over. Stop. Please stop. Li Wan. Wan. Standing outside the circle, Li Wan's mouth twitched faintly at the sound of that Wan, as if recalling something unpleasant. She tilted her head toward one of the bodyguards and said in a flat, even tone, break his legs. The bodyguard nodded and squeezed into the circle, bar raised. The first blow landed on Chun Yuan's knee. His scream shot up in pitch, then cut off halfway with a gurgle, like it had gotten stuck in his throat. Then a second blow. A third. A sharp, clean crack echoed through the alley, like a dry branch snapping in two. Chun Yuan lay face down on the ground, one hand stretched out in front of him, his fingers digging into the cracks in the pavement. His whole body shook violently. His broken left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and a dark stain spread across the fabric of his pants. The bodyguard stepped back and stood waiting. Li Wan walked over and stood over him, looking down. Chun Yuan's eyes were red and swollen, tears and cold sweat mixing together and dripping off his chin. He tilted his head up, slurring broken words. Wan. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Li Wan stared down at him coldly. Your biggest mistake was ever showing your face in front of me. And when you make a mistake, you pay for it. With that, she grabbed an iron bar from one of the men nearby, and brought it down hard between his legs. An even shriller scream ripped through the alley. Chun Yuan pressed his face into the ground, his features twisted in agony, his lips turning purple. His whole body convulsed twice, then went still. Li Wan stared down at him for 2 more seconds, then straightened up and turned toward the mouth of the alley. Get him out of here. Don't let anyone see. 2 bodyguards stepped forward, each grabbing one of his arms, and dragged him toward the far end of the alley. When Li Wan stepped out of the alley, a black car was parked by the roadside. I was sitting inside and I'd watched every second of what had just happened. She pulled open the door and sat down next to me, then wrapped her arms gently around one of mine and rested her chin on my shoulder. Her voice was soft. I took care of it. There won't be anyone else ever again. You're the only person I've ever loved. From start to finish. I said nothing, just stared at her. I grabbed her by the hair and had my way with her, then told her to get out. I drove off alone, offering no comment on anything she'd done that day. A few days later in the afternoon, I was going through a document with my phone on the corner of the desk, when Li Wan called. It was the 5th time she'd reached out since that day. I picked up. What do you want? Su Yang, are you busy? I was just wondering. You said you'd think about going through with the engagement once I took care of that problem. So now, she spoke carefully, like she was afraid raising her voice would upset me. I'm busy right now. Piled up with projects, back-to-back meetings. We'll talk about it once I'm through all this. I hung up right after and didn't give it another thought. Not long after, there was a knock at the office door. Come in. The door opened and my assistant walked in. Mr. Shu, our people watching Chunyuan sent back an update. I leaned back in my chair and looked at him. Tell me. The assistant paused for a moment before speaking. After what happened, he got basic treatment at the hospital, then went home. After a day of resting up, he started covering his face and hanging around Li Wan's place a lot, spying on everything she does. When he's alone, he keeps muttering about how he won't let her get away with it, how he's going to get revenge. But Li Wan has bodyguards everywhere she goes now. He can't get close enough to do anything. I nodded at that. I was thinking if he was too cowardly to get revenge, I'd have that woman go after him again, push him into fighting back. Looks like that won't be necessary. The assistant nodded. Our people are still watching him. If anything new comes up, no rush. I held up a hand to cut him off. You can go ahead with the other plan. The assistant nodded. I'll arrange it right away. With that, he turned and left. The office fell quiet again. One afternoon, Chunyuan heard a knock at the door. Thinking it was food delivery, he croaked, "Leave it outside." But the knocking didn't stop. 3 more raps. Frowning, Chunyuan looked up, pushed himself off the table, and hobbled to the door on his crutch. He pulled it open a crack and peeked out. It was someone he'd met around town, a guy named Song Ming. Chunyuan opened the door wider and stared at him. What are you doing here? Song Ming didn't answer. Right away. He walked straight inside, glanced at the empty liquor bottles on the table, then pulled out a chair and sat down. Heard what happened to you. Came to check on you. Here to laugh at me? Chunyuan shut the door, walked back to the table, sat down, and took another long drink from the bottle. Song Ming was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on Chunyuan's casted leg. How's the leg? How's it? Chunyuan slammed the bottle down on the table and laughed bitterly. One leg broken, and the other thing's ruined. How do you think it is? Song Ming just looked at him, didn't say anything. The room was quiet for a few seconds. Chunyuan took another drink, liquor dripping down his chin and onto his collar. What are you gonna do? Song Ming asked. Chunyuan set the bottle down and stared at the table, his voice quieter than before. Wait till I'm healed. Wait till you're healed. How long you gonna wait, looking like that? What do you want me to do then? Chunyuan lifted his head sharply, his eyes bloodshot. She's got bodyguards everywhere. If I go after her, I'm just asking to get killed. Song Ming just watched him silently. Chunyuan dropped his head again and waved a hand. Just go. Leave me alone. At that, Song Ming reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, pulled out a key and a small vial of liquid and set them on the table. Chunyuan's eyes locked onto the key at once. What's this? The key to her villa, Song Ming said, looking straight at him. And a bottle of knockout drops. You can't get to her during the day, but what about at night? Chunyuan's pupils shrank slightly. He didn't reach for them, but he couldn't take his eyes off the key and the vial. How'd you get these? Don't worry about how I got them. Song Ming held his gaze. I heard what happened, so I found a way to get these. Figured you'd need them. Chunyuan was quiet for 2 seconds. Why are you helping me? You helped me once before, Song Ming said. I owe you. Chunyuan didn't ask anything else. After a long moment, he reached out, picked up the key and the vial, and closed his fist around them. Got it. With that, he picked them up and walked away. Song Ming stood up and walked out with him. After they parted ways, Song Ming walked another dozen meters or so, made sure no one was around, then pulled out his phone and sent a message. I gave him the stuff. Looks like he's gonna do it. A few days later in the afternoon, I was sitting behind my desk when there was a knock at the door. Come in. My assistant pushed the door open and said to me, Mr. Su, it's all over on that end. I looked up, curious. What exactly happened? Truth be told, when I'd had my assistant arrange for the key to be given to Chunyuan, I'd figured he'd just sneak into Li Wan's place to get his revenge. But things unfolded completely beyond my expectations. The kid rounded up a whole gang of street thugs, snuck into Li Wan's home, abducted her, and locked her up. I was stunned when I got the news. I never would have guessed he'd go that far. I also knew Li Haiyuan was far more formidable than he appeared. The moment he learned his daughter had been taken, he would act at once. Chun Yuan and his ragtag group didn't stand a chance against Li Haiyuan. So after receiving the news, I told my assistant to keep a close watch on all of them. Now that he said the whole thing had concluded, I naturally wanted the full details. At my question, the assistant spoke quickly. The moment Li Haiyuan found out his daughter had been taken, he used every connection at his disposal to track her down. His men located her and brought her home that same night. They also took the 2 men guarding her with them. Once Li Wan got home, she told her father everything that had happened to her. Unwilling to let the scandal spread, he didn't call the police. Instead, he used his resources and sent men to hunt down Chun Yuan and his crew. They chased Chun Yuan into an abandoned residential building. With his broken legs slowing him down, he fell from the upper floors and died on the spot. As for the rest of them, we didn't have people monitoring them around the clock, so we don't know their fates for sure. But they likely didn't get off easy. I nodded and looked at the assistant. How is Li Wan now? The assistant went on. After she got home, her father locked her in her room for days. She didn't step outside once. He blames Li Wan for the whole mess, since it all started when she hired that assistant. In a fit of rage, Li Haiyuan was going to disown her completely and sever all ties. But at the last minute, Li Wan threatened him. She said if he disowned her, she'd tell everyone everything that had happened to her. Even if he refused to acknowledge her as his daughter, the entire Li family would be disgraced. I laughed out loud at that. I never would have thought Li Wan would be stupid enough to pull something like that. Who did she think Li Haiyuan was? The head of the entire Li clan. There was no way he'd cave to such a childish threat. I looked at the assistant and asked, what did Li Haiyuan do about her threat? The assistant hesitated for a moment before answering. We couldn't find out exactly what he did to her. All we know is that not long after, Li Wan had a complete mental breakdown. She started screaming, rolling around the house, raving incoherently. Li Haiyuan had her committed to a psychiatric hospital. I had a pretty good idea what had happened. Li Haiyuan had likely drugged his daughter, pushed her over the edge until she truly lost her mind. That way, the scandal would never leak out. After the assistant finished his report, I waved a hand dismissively. All right. I've heard enough. You can go. The assistant nodded and left. The office fell silent at once. I stared out the window in the direction of the Li estate. I'd only ever intended to go through with the arranged marriage. I never expected that woman to start an affair with her own assistant. That would have been fine on its own. I could have just called off the engagement. But she had the nerve to cling to me like a leech, begging me to go through with it. When there was no other way, I had to take more extreme measures. Don't blame me for being cruel. You brought this on yourself. This story reveals that lack of boundaries and short-sighted selfishness will trigger a chain of tragedies. As a fiancée, the heroine acted intimately with her assistant and humiliated her partner in public. After the incident, she only pretended to apologize to protect the family marriage alliance and cruelly hurt the assistant afterwards. Seeing through her profit-driven hypocrisy, the male lead secretly fueled conflicts. Out of resentment, the assistant abducted the heroine and fell to his death eventually. Her father drove his daughter insane and sent her to a mental hospital to cover up the scandal. All characters were ruled by selfish desires. The heroine was vain and frivolous, the assistant obsessive, and the father valued reputation over family bonds. It warns us to maintain propriety and sincerity in relationships. Those who only calculate gains and indulge their desires will be consumed by their own greed and end in ruin.